99.8 KCFM
Podcast.
Brian Little, good evening.
Hi Matthew, you okay?
I'm very well. Now manager of Wrexham, of course, and commiserations on the relegation to the conference, but you've got a record of dragging teams back from the non-league pyramid, so I'm sure you'll do it again.
Yeah, it's been a very sort of crazy few months, really. I joined the club when they were in trouble and unfortunately haven't managed to make too much of a difference, but I have made a lot of changes in the last week or two since the end of the season, and very much looking forward to the next year now, trying to rebuild what is a club with a great history and a great record and a great fan base. And as you say, it's something that I've been involved with before, so hopefully I can set it off in the right direction.
So then, going back to that 2001 season, how on earth did you do it?
It's.
I mean, we'll go into the details,
yeah,
but just generally, it's just the most impossible task that you managed to fulfil.
Well, I think it was a case of right from the outset, things going wrong, and genuinely a group of fellas just pulling together and in a crazy sort of way laughing their way through it. We had one or two very important characters around the club at the time. They were important to me, and I just feel that there was this volume of support which genuinely wanted to help everybody, and that was very evident. And it just went from strength to strength. And I always say in those sort of situations, when you have problems, the initial period is very important. If you have a few bad results, you can go to pieces completely. However, if you get one or two decent results, there is this bonding thing that really does come together. And I think we had a magnificent sort of bond. Looking back on it, so many things that you probably will refresh my memory on, I guess, as we talk. But there was just a good group of people who wanted to try and play football, who weren't quite sure whether they were going to get paid at the end of each week or not, but somehow just hung in there together and were very good and very solid with each other. So it was a very, very interesting period in my life, one which I look back on it with great fondness. It for me is one of the clubs that I really do, and I'm genuinely pleased to have had some part in their history. But it was a fascinating period for me, and it was one of those situations where I do believe, looking back on it, I did put myself down as the Indian chief, and all my little Indians followed me around, which is the most important thing. I think you needed a chief at that time, and everyone else had to respond to whoever was in charge. So I felt it was very important for me to be the chief, to make decisions, to be as proud and as brave as I could, and lead the people around me. And in fairness, they followed, and it was a great experience.
The contrast between your playoff campaign and the current one for Hull City is pretty obvious. But you need good management whether you're one of the haves, like Phil Brown's Hull City, or one of the have-nots, like Brian Little's Hull City. A lot of the principles will remain the same, won't they?
Yeah, you try and do things properly. I mean, we tried to do things properly, but I can remember so many times we had a team coach that was owned by the club at the time that we used to have to stop at every service station to fill the radiator up with water, because it kept sort of blowing up. But that in itself was, we used to just stop, get out the bus and have a laugh and a joke about it and little things like that. And now even where I am at Wrexham, I travel in first class condition. We usually use either Liverpool's first team coach or Burn or something like that. We have one of the top coaches in the country to drive us around. So, but I look back at Hull and really we just laughed our way through situations like that. It was important to do that. I think, had the manager at the front of the coach been sitting morning saying, "Oh, we can't do this weekend. This is no good for me. This is no good for preparation," then quite honestly that would have spread to the players very, very quickly. So I think in a situation where things aren't going well for you in terms of off the field. You have to be strong enough to put them to the back of your mind, not to let people see that it is something that you're bothered about. And quite honestly, you just have to plough your way through it.
You'd arrived at the end of the previous season, 99-2000. You took over from Warren Joyce. What sort of club did you join at that stage when you look back now?
I remember watching the first game, which was the last game of the season.
Remember it well, yeah.
And we lost 3-0 to Hartlepool. And things were very obvious that the team. In fairness to Warren, he'd done a great job in keeping the club together and what have you. But it was certain to me that I needed to change the team as quickly as I could. I wasn't at that stage aware of that in 6 or 8 weeks' time from there on in there were more problems around the corner, which there was. But I think the one thing I always look back on originally from that first game was Hartlepool beat me 3-0. They, I think, got into the playoffs.
They did, yes.
And that told me what sort of side I needed to try and put together to get into the playoffs the season after. So my immediate message to myself was, look at Hartlepool, look what sort of side they are. They're in the playoffs. If I'm going to do well at Hull, that's the type of team I want to have. And that's the sort of standard I've got to get to. So it was a great early lesson in terms of teaching me about what standard was needed to be required to be somewhere near successful. Now, whether I was going to be able to do that or not was another question, but I'd seen very quickly what it took to get into the playoffs, and that was a good early learning lesson for me.
You were paraded by the club within 24 hours of Warren Joyce's departure. Did you have any sense of discomfort about that, given that it all did happen a bit quickly? Certainly for the supporters it happened quickly, and Warren Joyce had emerged as such a hero from the famous Great Escape season.
Well, I think, years on, it's fair to say, I employed Warren at Tranmere just 3 or 4 years back as one of my scouting and coaching staff, because we actually got on very well together. And I think we respected each other. And I wasn't aware of Warren still being at the club, to be honest. I had been told that he'd left the club and, the club was there for me to take over. That's actually the second time that's happened to me in my career, where I've been told something and the person who you've been told has actually left is sitting in the dressing room waiting to smile at you, sort of thing. So I think again it was very important that I spoke to Warren very quickly. We did have a good rapport. We got on very well. He had done his piece at the club. He was disappointed to move on, but as I've said, I think we spoke very frankly to each other, and all these years on, we still are. I've not seen Warren for a little while now. I know he's working out of the country for Manchester United at the moment. But again, I gave him an opportunity to come back into football when I was at Tranmere to work with me. So I think we very quickly got on with each other. But it was a very uncomfortable situation. It wasn't one that I expected, and it was one that disappointed me a little bit, and one that told me one or two things about what actually went on at the club. Basically, that there were things that were going on that you weren't quite told about. There were other things that were going on that once you got the hang of things, it didn't surprise you, because it was a period at the club where the unexpected could happen at any given moment.
You had to deal. I mean, you had the Hartlepool game 3-0. Then you had the summer to start really thinking about what you were going to do. You had to deal with a transfer embargo.
Yes.
Gates were locked over the summer over unpaid debts to David Lloyd. It was hardly what you call a straightforward start, was it?
No, it was unbelievable. It was a real test. It was, as I've said, it was a massive, massive effect on me. I'd sort of said very much so that I was willing to move up to the area. I wanted to do the job properly. I think, like anybody, if you've been in football for many years, you knew of Hull as being a club that had so many problems in those recent times leading up to when I went there, but a club that had the potential, should anyone be given the opportunity to turn it around, it had the potential to climb up to, the dizzy heights of where it is at this moment in time. Obviously, my initial thoughts were still, despite the problems that were there, that I wanted to be potentially the man who could take it in the right direction for the first time for many years. And I have this belief in football that, every now and again a club hits the bottom, and then it starts to bounce back. My mentality on Hull when I went there was that it was pretty much at the bottom, and it was time for it to bounce back. There were still a few things that it had to go through, unfortunately, which I hadn't expected. I thought it had probably hit the bottom, but I did have one or two depths to go down to, should we say, if that's the right way to explain it.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a surprise. There were still one or two little little surprises for me, 1 or 2 little kicks up the backside, 1 or 2 disappointments.
But
all in all, I just ploughed on through it.
We're certainly going to come to those. We've got ample time to go over some of the specifics. I mean, generally in that sort of early period, I find it amazing. Given your history, 3 playoffs with Leicester, successful in the final one. You'd won the League Cup and beaten Manchester United in the process as manager of Aston Villa. You'd taken Darlington back into the league after having gone into the conference. You know, you were a manager with a proper history, and Hull City felt lucky to have such a manager. It seems amazing, and I think a testament to your character that you stuck it out, given there was tax investigations, there were police investigations, none of which was to do with you, but was directly affecting your ability to do your job.
Yeah, I think it's just the way I am with my work. I'm slightly different to a lot of people in the game, I think, you know, and having managed at the top, I think a lot of people who've managed at the top would not take it, would not want to be part of, you know, a real lower division sort of fight. For me, I enjoy football. I like being at work. I actually, if I could be totally honest, you know, working at the lower level for me is very much more earthy. It's very much more the ordinary man's game. You know, there are still things that the manager does. I still, you know, enjoyed going around picking the kit up. My time at Aston Villa, if I touched the kit, you know, the kit man used to think, oh my God, I'm going to get the sack because the manager's picking the kit up. You know, it was absolutely crazy. So there were little things that I didn't really. I'm not saying I would never, given the opportunity, go back to the top again, but my mentality has always been that I've enjoyed football at the lower levels as more so than at the top end. You know, because it's just that little bit more earthy, and there's a little bit more natural and ordinary, and there's still something about it that I can relate to when I was a young player and a young boy, you know. So I do enjoy that now, and it's nice. I know the football today and ever since then can give people at the top end great rewards, but you know, my mentality isn't geared around that. If I'm happy at work, then I enjoy wherever I'm at, and Hull was a great challenge for me, and I just really wanted to try and get it right. It was a massive challenge for me, and nothing will change. I'm that type of a person, so it was probably right up my street, to be honest.
And at one point, the club was losing 30 grand a week, the administrators were in, the taxman wanted $500,000, David Lloyd wanted his rent, the padlocks were back on, nobody was being paid, and form picked up.
Yeah, it was amazing, wasn't it, really? And I can remember a little story, if I can throw one in. I remember one day very early in the proceedings, you know, a group of supporters knocking on my house door and with a great big bag of money saying, go and share that out amongst the players. You know, that was the type of, and those sort of things were an inspiration to me. Obviously, I didn't take the money. I said to them, no, you must go through the proper quarters. You must try and make sure that gets down to the administrators. But I think little things like that were a great incentive to do well. So irrespective of what was going on off the pitch, you know, we used to get in the dressing room. I used to speak to the players on a weekly basis about what I'd been told by, you know, either people behind the scenes or the administrators once they'd got themselves sorted out. And I'd really try, as I've said, I tried to be the chief. I tried to be the person who, above all and everything else that was going on, knew as much as anybody else and was there prepared to make decisions that would help everybody long term. So it was a great challenge for me, as I've said, but there were many other little things going on around me that gave me the belief and the desire and the impetus to keep things going.
Brian Little is with us, the only other manager ever to take Hull City into a playoff campaign, 24 hours ahead of Hull City versus Watford tomorrow night in the second leg of the Championship playoff semi-final. Of course, at the KC Stadium, there'll be full match commentary on that tomorrow night, and we'll talk more with Brian Little in just a couple of minutes. On Thursday, we don't have a chairman's night. Paul Duffin's having the night off. Instead, I'll be talking to long-serving football commentator John Helm about his career with Yorkshire Television and beyond. Now works for Five and for FIFA. And on Friday, the Hull City fans panel will be looking back on Watford and hopefully looking ahead to Wembley. The other live action this week, aside from the City game tomorrow night, Harlequins versus Hull FC and Huddersfield versus Hull KR. They both kick off simultaneously on Sunday, 3 o'clock in Super League. Our coverage with Dave Hudson begins from 2. Brian, one of the many remarkable things about that 2000-2001 playoff season, which many people forget, is that it started so poorly while the club was actually at its most stable point of the season, and it took you 8 games before you actually won.
Yeah, I remember. I think the first game of the season was at Blackpool, you know, and I'm sure I can remember it being a beautiful day. We went there and expected to do quite well. You know, we felt we had a decent side and we thought we could play reasonably well. And I remember the whole supporters, and that was one of the inspirational days for me. You know, it was the opening day of the season. It was early, so it was one of them great days to go to Blackpool. You know, I think.
Yeah. I remember it well. I was there. I was in that crowd.
Yeah, and my memory is that we had a great crowd. We actually played quite well, but somehow we gave some crazy goals away, and I think we lost 3-1 on the day.
I think, as I recall, the last two goals that made it 3-1 to Blackpool came in the last sort of 5 or 6 minutes of the game, and it was 1-1. Mike Edwards scored quite early on. Yeah. It was 1-1 for a long time.
Yeah, you know, I remember playing well, and I remember it being a beautiful day. I remember us having great support there, but I also remember coming away thinking, how have we lost that? You know, and it was a major disappointment. But it showed that despite the problems, that the fans wanted to be involved with it. And then I think again very early we played Plymouth, who I thought were an excellent team that season. They were very strong. I'm sure Paul Sturrock was the manager at the time, and they looked a good side, and we played them and played well against them, and I think we drew that one, but yeah, probably should have won the game. So I remember early form was okay, and you know, despite the problems that were on, we were I felt competitive, and there
were certainly far more draws than defeats in those opening 8 games before you got the first win. There was the defeat at Blackpool on the opening day, and a defeat at home to Cheltenham, which didn't do you a lot of good. But other than that, draws with Plymouth, Macclesfield, Lincoln, Leyton Orient, and Mansfield.
Yeah, I think again my first. More often than not, my first aim when I go into football clubs is first and foremost to try and make them a difficult side to beat. I think that's a principle that I've worked on in most cases. More often than not, because I've been given jobs where, you know, clubs have been going through a difficult spell or are currently in a difficult spell. So I think my mentality when I've gone into clubs has genuinely been to try and make them a difficult side to beat. And at every point you pick up is a point in the right direction. And from there on in, once you get a win or two under your belt, the confidence grows from there. And I think my principles were very much in place at that time.
You'd brought in a couple of players over the summer, of course, but it wasn't your team at all. It never is at that stage. And there was this transfer embargo that was imposed as well, I think because of the problems with the PFA having to pay wages and so on. Could you see a way forward in those early stages when you were unable to make it your team with your players?
Well, no, not really. As I've said, I think, you know, it's always nice to put your stamp on it, but I think the people who were in there were the people who it was affecting, and to have brought anybody in from the outside for whatever reason at that time might not have been the wisest thing to do. You know, they might not have been as committed to the cause as the lads who were already there. So there was a period later when there was a possibility of changing one or two things around. But early doors, I think, in early days in the job, it was a case of, you know, the players who were there, who were fighting for their lives in terms of, you know, having to look after their wives and their families and their children and what, were the ones who really needed to get out on the field of play and show everybody they were willing to have a go for them. And I think, you know, the fans definitely appreciated that, the fact that it was the lads who were right in there, and those lads weren't getting paid regularly enough, or were certainly not sure of whether they were going to get paid regularly. And I think everybody appreciated that it was there was that togetherness. It's like I've said, you know, you can in a period of problems, if you get one or two things going in the right directions, you can have a bond that becomes so strong that it is probably the best way to go on.
Well, one thing I would suggest that you did inherit was a defence. You had Edwards, Greaves, Goodison, Harper, Whittle, Whitney. Maybe there wasn't a lot necessarily to tinker with there, and of course, certainly 4 of those were synonymous with the club's great escape.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Justin Whittle, who I still speak to very often, even today, which is great. Ian Goodison, obviously, who has become a real personal friend of mine. I mean, Ian rings me virtually every week and calls me Dad now. So
well, you took him to Tranmere afterwards, of course.
Yeah, and when I was out of football a couple of times, I strongly recommended Ian to. I remember taking him in my car one day. He was on his own. He had nowhere to go. I took him down to Bristol City and recommended him to Danny Wilson down there. I mean, Ian, I've gone a long way with Ian and Theodore, especially so, who were, I thought, two really talented players. As I've said, Justin Whittle I would class as a family friend now, very much so.
And you had the local lads who bled the club in Edwards and Greaves as well.
Well, Mike Edwards, I spoke to Mike again a few weeks ago. He's playing for Notts County at the moment. Again, got an awful lot of time for him as a person, a super lad, which is great. And I saw Greavesy being sub for Burton the other day, and I was waving at him from the side. He couldn't see me in the stands, but yeah, I thought they were a terrific bunch. And as I say, the nice thing about it is, as times moved on, even though I'm still in football and most of those lads are still playing the game, I class them as friends, which is how I feel about them, you know. And we did have a tremendous bond there, and as I've said, they were a super group of people. Justin is a great person, you know. I mean,
and yet there was suggestion that you and Justin had a history because of what happened at Stoke, and indeed something that Hull City fans always say with something of hindsight is that there were a number of managers who, in a way, tried to phase out Justin Whittle, and they all failed in a way, and they kept having to bring him back.
Well, the bottom line is, when I was at Stoke City and Justin was there, we had this intention to go into the then Division 1 it is, or the Championship is it now, and quite honestly, we didn't feel that Justin was the type of player to take us up that level. But always knowing that Justin would play football, and Hull was a great opportunity for him to go to. You know, he would get regular first-team football. There was never anything wrong between Justin and myself, and I can say that quite honestly. I mean, as I've said today, I know Justin's wife and my wife still speak to each other from time to time on the phone. And when I see Justin, as I say, it's like seeing one of your families. You know, he's a super lad. So it was just absolute rubbish, really, what was going on in that particular stage.
You made some, after that first win, which I'm sure was very welcome against Shrewsbury, you made some slow progress, steady progress. You got to Christmas with a little bit of form without sort of pulling up any trees. Yeah. Then there was this remarkable sequence where you went 5 games over Christmas without even scoring, and everybody knew, not least you, but certainly the supporters also knew that reinforcements were required, and in came Kevin Francis and Rodney Rowe.
Yeah, they were again, I mean, I smile whenever I hear it or talk about it, and as I've said, I knew you'd sort of click some little memories which make me smile. Kevin was fantastic. He was a great character, unbelievable. I thought he was a marvellous man. And Rodney just loved being around the place, you know. He again, it was the classic sort of little and large partnership.
That's what I was going to bring up, actually. I mean, those two were obviously as different a strike partnership as it would. You know, you've got this guy who's 6'8", 6'9", or whatever Kevin Francis was, and Rodney Rowe was certainly probably 5'5" when soaking wet. Was that deliberate to make them just as different as it's possible to be?
Well, I think it's very difficult to go back over time and come up with all the whys and wherefores and who else you'd spoken to and what have you. But I think one of the major reasons they came to us was, you know, yes, there were, I felt, an improvement on what we had there anyway.
I mean, they did work, didn't they, Brian Rowe and Francis? And by February, the form was excellent. You got the Manager of the Month award, but at the same time, the debts had now become so intense. The wages were blocked. How on earth do you motivate professional footballers, particularly professional footballers who aren't on massive salaries by any comparison, when they're not getting any money at all?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be honest with them, and I think we said quite openly, you know, to anyone, if in fact, you know, there was something else out there for them, then you know, we would willingly help them go there. In fact, I know for a fact that I've said to one or two of the lads that I'll drive you there myself. But I think we just knew that there was only one thing we could do, and that was to play football. I think, you know, there have been quite a few cases in recent years of footballers and clubs going into administration and you know, some football players saying, oh, well, I don't really want to play in case I get injured and it hampers whatever I'm going to do in the future. We never had that mentality at all. We're here to play football. We've got to play football. It's the only thing that keeps us sane. It's the only thing that helps us get through the day. And we all decided very much that that was the way we'd go about it. So again, it was all about, you know, not as an individual talking to the media or any way, shape or form. We did do that. I had to do that. But at the same time, it was a case of sitting down with the players and talking to them and being honest and open and frank and not keeping anything from them. So I think, as I've said, there was this real togetherness. There was this open discussion day in and day out, which went on.
Is it hard to be the boss in a situation like that? I mean, if they did something wrong, did you almost feel less entitled to shout at them in a way that sometimes a manager or coach is going to have to do?
Well, I'll tell you totally honestly, nobody did anything wrong. There was nothing really to do wrong. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody got hold of their kit, they took it home, they watched it themselves, they brought it in the next day, their boots were clean and tidy, there was absolutely nothing they could do wrong.
That's extraordinary. That's an extraordinary team spirit when that happens, isn't it?
Well, more often than not, when you're at a football club, you actually do too much for people. And that's where things go wrong, because they expect a little bit more, or they can't be bothered to do this. We didn't have any of that, and that situation created no room for anyone who wanted to do anything wrong. There was absolutely nothing to do wrong. More often than not, people go wrong because they've not paid for their lunch at the training ground, or they've not picked their kit up off the training field. You couldn't leave anything lying around. It was all you'd got. Every single thing that we did was just for each other, really. Obviously, some individuals were behind the scenes trying to work out something for themselves, but credit to them for not sitting on their backsides doing nothing about it. We had, as I've said, we had a very honest discussion day in and day out about what's happening this weekend. Are we playing? Yes, we are. Who are we playing? What are we going to do? We didn't go scouting. We didn't know anything about them. We just said, look, let them worry about us. That was our mentality.
It's a good way of
our
doing
mentality was. I mean, in this modern day and age, again, I spend a lot of my time analysing the opposition. We never bothered about that. We couldn't do that. We just simply said, let them worry about us. We're going out there. We're going to have a real go. We want to win a game of football because we want to enjoy the end of our week. That was the be-all and end-all for us. It was the be-all and end-all was getting to the whatever night of the week, the Saturday especially so, and having won a football match or having done well in a football match.
And you weren't getting paid either, were you, Brian?
No, again, that was the I think the younger players and the people with young families, I think for me that was more important for them to get the kid. I always felt that one way or another it would sort itself out, and ultimately, my job was to do my job properly. If I did my job properly, I was out there to try and impress people that was the case. I obviously wanted to stay at the club, which as it turned out was the right thing for me. But again, my mentality was purely about doing my job properly in what was a very difficult circumstance, but a circumstance which I said there was no road out. I think to walk out of it or to walk away from it would have been entirely the wrong thing to do. And I think, as I've said, everybody had the same belief, the same desire, and it was very much a team effort all the way through.
Did anyone ever not turn up for training because they physically couldn't?
We had odd occasions where one or two people genuinely were saying that they had no money for petrol. We had a group of people who travelled, so we again scaled some days. We scaled training down to the point that we had to miss a day. We took all of those things into consideration. There were certain days that we really didn't tell the people. We had a group of lads who came over from Manchester, Bolton way, which would be Gary Brabham and the lads, and really we just said to them, right, okay. If you've got to do something at home today or tomorrow or today and tomorrow, but come in on whatever day and ready, we'll do our training, we'll get ready for the weekend. So there was a mix of everything. Yes, we had to do certain things like that. There were situations where there were genuine concerns about players and not being able to afford things or pay for things. So we took that all into consideration.
Two other things I want to briefly mention before we take another breather on that. You had 3 players who did leave under their entitlement because of the lack of wages. That was Marcel, Harper and Brightwell. I don't suppose anybody could really blame them for that.
No, not at all. I mean, as I've said, I suppose odd little people here, there and everywhere might have said something about it, but deep down they went with our blessing. I remember that particular period having quite a few conversations with the chairman at Darlington, and initially was happy for the lads to be wanted, but there were one or two occasions where he just pushed the boat a little bit too far and wound you up a little bit, But it was a situation where, as I've said, they had to look after themselves. They weren't frowned upon in any way by any of their teammates.
And you had prize assets as well, of course. I mean, the fact that those three left, who were kind of, with the exception of Steve Harper maybe, were kind of on the fringes,
Yes.
really. But the prize assets, I mean, you had two World Cup players in Goodison and Whitmore. You had the local boy who was providing a bit of interest from clubs higher up in Mike Edwards. You had Justin
Yes.
Whittle, who'd been successful and played for Celtic. I mean, did anybody sort of circle like vultures around them because they thought they might be easy pickings?
I guess there was one or two calls, but as I've said, I think everybody just got on with it. It was, I guess, looking back on it, a little bit of a surprise that more of the lads didn't go and more of them didn't. In that particular circumstance, and in those situations where in those days anybody could move at any time of the season, there was no restrictions on transfers or anything outside of the transfer deadline late in March. So it was a bit of a surprise, and certainly Mike Edwards had created interest as a young player who was playing in the side from a very early age. I mean, I remember the day Mike got 100 games under his belt, and I remember looking, I was thinking, crikey, look how old, he's still a young kid, he's got 100 games under his belt already, which was a tremendous achievement from his point of view. But again, I just think that everybody just got their head down and played football. Obviously, I think it was George Reynolds, the chairman at the time at Darlington, was quite into trying to snap a bargain up from here, there and everywhere, and he felt he got bargains. Well, that was fine. We had no animosity whatsoever towards the players, but as it turned out, I don't think they made the best move in some respects.
Yeah, Mike Edwards' 100th league appearance came at the age of 20. It was a remarkable stat at the time.
Yes.
Brian Little is with us, the only other manager ever to take Hull City into a playoff campaign, and we'll talk more to him shortly. Brian Little then, with us for a final few minutes. The form remained the rest of that season, Brian, as we start to head towards the business end and that place in history that you acquired as the first ever manager to take the club into the playoffs. And the club stabilised, which helped. Adam Pearson came in.
Yes.
What were your first thoughts on the new owner when he arrived?
Oh, I liked Adam. I got on very well with him. I thought he was very driven, very single-minded. I'd met him on a couple of occasions prior to him being at the club. In fact, I think the administrator, if I remember right, had introduced me to two of the three parties of which were definitely going to take over the club at some stage. So I'd met Adam previously. He had personal acquaintances of people who I'd known in football for quite some time. So yeah, it seemed to be definitely a good thing. I mean, he definitely had the desire and the belief in turning the club around. So I was very impressed with him. I got on well with him, and I had no problems with him coming in. I thought he was a breath of fresh air for everybody.
And once he arrived, of course, the debts were cleared, the wages started to be paid. Now, you've talked up the players' attitude terrifically about how they were when they weren't getting the money, but you must have seen a change in them once their wages started to be paid and their domestic troubles that would have been caused as a consequence started to ease.
Yeah, I remember there were days of days and days of everybody sort of counting up what perhaps they thought they were owed, and
I can well believe Gary Brabin doing something like that.
Oh, without a doubt, yes. And nobody argued with Brabs; he got what he wanted anyway, so it was all right. So yeah, it was just a real light-hearted atmosphere, something really different, something light about it, and Adam went out his way to make sure that, whatever little perks he meant that made people feel better, they were there. I mean, if just little bits of new training gear or new footballs for training or whatever, there was all sorts of little things like that which came our way, which were like little perks to us. I mean, it was the norm and it was something you needed to have, but the fact that they came so quickly and were organised quickly was, again, testament to Adam and his ambition and his desire to make sure that people thought, here is a man who is going to take over the actual running of the club on a day-to-day basis. So I was delighted with that, and as I've said, he played his part very much so in that final little flurry for us.
You had some brilliant wins in that last sort of 6 weeks. There was the 2-1 win at Boothby Park against Scunthorpe United.
Yes.
John Whitney's famous goal celebration right in front of the Scunthorpe fans that he talked about on this very programme, and the fans absolutely love talking about. And the 3-2 against Chesterfield, who were a controversial side that season, but as far as their on-pitch activities were concerned, were near the top, certainly on merit.
Yeah.
And the playoffs became a reality. They started to get that little bit closer. There was really something to go for, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was, and it was, as I said, it was one of those situations where we were coming to the end and thinking, we can get there, we can do it, we're going to achieve something this season, despite all of the things that had gone on. We were in a situation where, we could make our mark on the game. It would be something that would be remembered for quite some time. And I still think it's something that should be looked back upon and remembered, because it wasn't just a very short period of an administration or a lockout or whatever. It was almost an entire season of troubles. And leading up to that, there was troubles leading. So the club had years of troubles leading up to that. And the final season was probably the most unbelievable season I've ever been involved in all fairness, based on the problems that had gone on. So yeah, it was something that I think everybody had got very much into their system by then. Everybody was determined to try and do something, and it became no surprise to me that we eventually did make our way into the playoff spot. It was a fantastic achievement, and most of the players, especially so, need to be reminded and remembered for that, because it was a great effort on their part.
You sealed a place in the playoffs with a draw down at Southend, and that night and that achievement was beyond the dream of most supporters. I mean, for all the things you have achieved, and lest we forget, you won a Wembley final against Manchester United when you were in charge of Aston Villa. But it's different kinds of achievements, of course, but maybe the ones that come out of adversity, rather than ones that come out of being at a club that is largely trouble-free, give you more satisfaction, even if they don't get the same amount of plaudits and the same amount of publicity.
Yeah, I'm commonly asked, whenever I talk to football supporters, and I do that quite regularly now, about what were your favourite moments, what do you think about this, what do you think about that. And I do maintain, when I went to Darlington and brought them back into the Football League, I still think that was a great day for me. And I do then say very much and very often, my time at Hull City, most especially my early days, my first year there, was a fantastic year based on, what was going on in football. We just got on with it and achieved a playoff spot on the edge of that. I think those are probably two of my favourite times in football, certainly the Darlington spell. And my spell at Hull, I still to this day have to say I'm very, very keen on seeing how they do. It's nice to think that I was part of their recent history. And I'm absolutely delighted with, how I played my part that particular season. And I was privileged to work with, as I've said, a lot of people who I still keep in touch with today, who very much now look upon them as being my friends, which is a great thing to say about football, because it's a cutthroat business, and quite often football managers and football players, end up not really liking each other very much, So I think from my point of view, I think it's fair to say that I met some good people that year, and we worked very hard together, and it was a terrific period in my life.
You finished sixth, and of course in the bottom division it's 7 that are in the equation. 3 go up automatically, the next 4 compete in the playoffs, and because you were 6, you had to start with the home leg against 5th place Leyton Orient, which isn't ideal, I know, and we'll come on that specifically. Yes. But of course, if you'd got a win instead of a draw on the last day against Carlisle, you'd have gone above Leyton Orient, and you would have had the away leg first at the weekend, and then had the full house at Boothby Park on the Tuesday night. But ultimately, did it actually matter whether you had the home leg first or the away leg first, or are you like most managers that I've heard who would always prefer to play away from home first and then have the full house on the Tuesday night? Yeah,
I think being away first would have been a great advantage to us at that time, without a doubt. And as I remember the game very much at home, my mentality at this moment in time was that we should have won by more than 1 goal. I think we played pretty well on the night. We were the better side. But in fairness, they were happy to go home with 1-0. I think, again, in football, all the years I've been in it, whenever you have 2-legged games, your mentality is, if you're the away side, your second game at home, if you feel you've got a chance, if you feel you can win, then, that really will see you through. And to have a home game, to have to win, to achieve something, is something that more often than not you actually do. So, it would have been better for us to have played away from home first. If we'd lost away from home 1-0, I'm quite convinced we could have scored 2 at home. And players' mentality and human beings' mentality play a massive part in games like this. Once they equalised with us down at their place, they had everything going in their favour. Everything was then bounding in their favour to get the result. So it it was a great achievement. It was a little bit unlucky to have ended up the way it did. But as I've said, you couldn't criticise the players for their efforts in any of the 2 playoff games.
John Ayre with the famous goal at Boothby Park, of course. 13,000 in the ground that day, Brian. What are your specific memories of the atmosphere and the support that day in the first leg of the playoffs?
Well, I thought it was fantastic, and it did give everybody the genuine belief that here we go. This is a club that has turned a corner. That was very much on the up. That had hit its rock bottom the year or so before. That now was beginning to get people to come through the terraces again to watch them play. Again, you can probably tell me what the gates were early doors when I went there, but they weren't anything like 13,000.
Well, I can tell you what Hartlepool was like on your opening game.
Yes.
It was 7,600, so a good 6,000 had come back since then.
And I think, genuinely, that if you look back at that would have been a game where people would have wanted to come and see a new manager coming in and this, that and the other. And I believe, there was... by the end of that next season, we'd got to that point of catching that Hartlepool team that I'd talked about at the end of the previous season. We'd put a team together in a very short period of time.
Who, ironically, also were the other team that went out in the playoff semi-finals that season.
And unbelievably, in such difficult circumstances, to have put a team together that 12 months on had made massive steps in the right direction was something that we were all proud about.
We've got about 3 minutes left, Brian, so we're just a couple more things I want to mention.
Yeah.
In that second leg, briefly, what was the game plan? Did you want to soak up pressure or did you want to play a normal attacking game? And when you did go 2-0 down, did you think it still could be salvaged?
Well, I think, again, our mentality throughout the whole season had been, we wanted to be a hard side to beat. We'd never given very much away. We went down there with the belief that we might just be able to certainly draw. We'd drawn enough games away from home all season to believe we could do it again. So our mentality was that still that same. Go out there, give nothing away, make sure we give very little away. We had enough in our team from certain situations to cause the opposition problems. So our game plan hadn't changed. I think you get to that stage in the season and to suddenly start writing the book different and say, right, fellas, here we go. I know we've done this way all season, but now we're going to do it different, would have been the wrong mentality altogether. And we never gave up. And even at 2-0, you would have thought, as a group, we never gave up. So we had a system we played, we had a certain way of playing, we believed in what we were doing. On so many occasions, years on from there, in games when you go a goal down, know you've got to change your team because their mentality is different. I can honestly say that the mentality of that team that season was as strong and as good as any team that I've ever dealt with. So we didn't have a different game plan. And when we were 2-0 down, we didn't have a different game plan. We always knew that our team would graft and grind and try and get a result. Ultimately, it wasn't quite good enough. But as I've said, I think the players who were playing that season could be forgiven for that.
Got about a minute left, just a couple more things. What were your general feelings at the final whistle? Was it more disappointment than pride or a mixture of the two?
Definitely a mixture of both. I think, as I've said, I was very, very proud of everybody. Proud of myself in many respects. I'd gone to a club that was in tremendous problems, stuck at it. I'd worked especially hard, very, very hard myself. And I think there was just that feeling of a massive disappointment, obviously, but at the same time, we were delighted with what we'd done. I still look back at Adam, and I felt that was a side where I remember seeing Adam, and I know Adam was absolutely bitterly disappointed. So I think I saw early signs that Adam had this desire to get wherever he wanted to go very, very quickly, and perhaps even the defeat in the playoffs was something that he didn't really like very much, in all fairness.
Well, what about you? Because, you'd had playoffs. I think you had 3 playoffs with Leicester before you finally won them.
Yes.
And you'd been in other campaigns as well. Are there something generally that you approve of?
Well, I think the football needs the playoffs. Without the playoffs, so many teams' seasons would be finished in January and February. The playoffs are a magnificent... they're a great plan. It's fantastic. Yes, there is a degree of wrongness in it if a team finishing third is so many points ahead of a team finishing sixth, and the team sixth get promotion. I accept that as being some form of criticism. But in terms of entertainment value, in terms of keeping football as an entertainment sport, then the playoffs are an absolute must. And
just finally, Brian, because we are just about out of time, what's your view of the Hull City you see today, and how have you viewed the rise up the divisions since your days at the club?
Well, I think it's fantastic, and I'm really pleased for them, and You know, I've met Phil on many occasions in the past. I know he played football with my brother Alan, so he's a good friend of Alan. Whenever I see him, he always asks me how my brother is and everything. So I'm especially pleased for Phil Brown. I think he's stuck at it. He's worked very hard to get where he is today, and he deserves the success he's getting. The team look very good. They look very organised. They look very capable of winning games. And I despite not being connected with the club at the moment, I actually feel quite proud of them because, as you say, you know, not too many years ago, the club was in a very, very difficult situation. So I'd like to wish them all the best. It's a terrific club. They've got great support. And as I've said, I'd like to think that, you know, Phil can make it to the top where he deserves to be given an opportunity.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed wallowing in this bit of nostalgia for the last sort of hour or so. And I know there's plenty of Hull City fans. I know it didn't end particularly brilliantly for you the following season, but I know there's plenty of Hull City fans who've got a lot to thank you for what happened in that 2001 season, where the club was kept together and ended up in the playoffs against all the adversity that was possible. And I'm going to say, on behalf of all of them, wish you all the best with Wrexham. Look forward to seeing them coming straight back into the league next year.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed.
Brian Little with us on Sports Call. Tomorrow night, no Sports Call. There's a match going on at the KC.